Christianity, original sin refers to the condition of sinfulness inherited by all humans from Adam and Eve, the first humans, due to their disobedience to God in the Garden of Eden. This inherited state of sinfulness isn't anything specific, but it is simply the corruption of human nature that predisposes individuals to more sin. In talking about Gacha games specifically, the original sin refers to Gacha in itself, and the multitude of stigmas and disadvantages the genre has been exposed to over the years as a result of simply being a Gacha game. Now, Gacha is referred to as Gachapon in its most traditional sense, namely Japanese vending machines where you had a chance of getting an item in the form of a capsule. Essentially a lottery type system akin to gambling, in which you pull the lever and are hoping to get a result from it. Gacha then took that concept and turned it into a game mechanic where players use in-game currency or real money to randomly acquire virtual items or unique characters. The first ever Gacha game is considered to be Konami's Dragon Collection, which was released on this social media platform called GREE that I had no idea existed back in 2010. Now, while some may argue that there were some Gacha game elements in other games such as MapleStory, Dragon Collection was the first ever game designed exclusively around the concept of Gacha mechanics. Now, moving forward over the past, 20 years, we've kind of come to this standstill where Gacha is in Western media and has its similar mechanics implemented through Overwatch loot boxes, Raid Shadow Legends, FIFA's thing where you pull for players, I guess, and now it's honestly just all over the place. Now, the genre still has a lot of kind of room to elaborate on before it kind of hits the mainstream, and you could argue that with the introduction of Genshin Impact into the scene, Gacha games became a lot more of a staple. I myself first started with a Gacha game called, I actually don't remember, but I do remember it revolved around ninjas. And this was like Angry Birds iPhone days. And then I myself played Genshin Impact during quarantine because I really liked Breath of the Wild. And everyone said, guys, it is a Gacha game where you don't have to have certain units to pass certain content. You can just play the game as is, and you don't need to roll for characters. And given that this was kind of like my second time playing a Gacha game, I said, great, this sounds like a lot of fun. And, the rest is history. Genshin made billions of dollars, and other companies followed suit with their own type of games, and other companies followed the same kind of mechanic. Now, kind of going back to this idea of the original sin, though, what I want to talk about is that Gacha games, while they haven't really existed for that long, at least in the context of all human history, the concept of gambling and, kind of playing on a lottery has for hundreds of years. And it's always had the same kind of stigmata behind it, being namely that you are spending money, a lot more money than you would if you were to invest that money into other kind of methods. Talking about investing theory, sometimes the best investment is the one that's going to increase your return depending on your risk kind of profile. Whether you are to put the money that you invested into gambling into, let's say real estate, the possibility of consistent returns on that over a 10-year horizon are probably pretty stable. With gambling, heck, you could probably make it all in one day. But obviously, different risk profiles and different things you're playing with. And so now applying that to Gacha games, you've kind of come into this area where Gacha is a live service game. And people in the gaming community, they hate live service games. They really do, because they do exactly what, gambling and all these other areas have stigmas behind, namely being that they're predatory and you're spending, especially in the live service game area, you're going to be spending more money buying microtransactions and in-game currency than you would if you were just to buy a $60 video game, which is why with, there being a stigma around live service games that are free, that's one thing, but then you get Western games that got introduced into the mix, such as Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League and Square Enix's The Avengers, where not only are you paying the $40-$60 price mark to simply play the game, but now you're being told that, okay, it's going to receive continual updates, which on the surface sounds great, but as you move on, and as Fortnite did so gallantly with a battle pass, this kind of pressure to continue playing the game to maximize your reward potential and keep up with the current meta, so to speak. Now, with gacha games specifically, they haven't really caught on in the live service sense of MMOs because, at least with an MMO, there's a level of respect. Just because an MMO, while it does have microtransactions, really only requires you to pay a subscription fee to actually enjoy the game. So, with gacha games, there is this sin in itself that by being predatory, and by virtue of that predation, and by virtue of essentially building your entire business model on the next character and or cosmetic to come out, that other issues start to pop up and create a stigma amongst other gamers and other people in engaging in these kind of games. Now, before we kind of wrap that all up, we'll start with Exhibit 1, Gooners. Now, if you notice, a lot of Eastern gacha games are, for the most part, wife-pulling simulators. So, there's a cool character that does XYZ cool action thing. So that's how you get the guys who love action to come in. But then two, they have a great design and maybe they're hot. And that's how you really get them. Which is why in these kind of games you don't really see too many male characters, where maybe in 1 year there will be 2 male characters added to the roster. Now, while there are other games that have prioritized women in the sense of, hey, let's make a husband pulling simulator, they really haven't seen as big of a success as these other titles. So one, it's Gooner bait. Gooner bait, in the sense of sex sells, does actually work to a certain degree, unless it's kind of just being shoved in your face. A good example of this is the live service game The First Descendant, which, honestly, is Gooner bait to the max. They don't hide it, and they know this. I don't know how much money they pull, but I know that as of last time I checked, they only had 3,000 active players on Steam. Aside from that, we're going to now get into Exhibit 2, microtransactions. Look, everybody hates microtransactions, especially in the context of live service games, as I've already stated. But the problem kind of becomes where, you get on this fine line, and then you ask the question of, do you need to pay money at all? And this could be like $5, $10, $60 to be able to play the game and compete with other players who spend more money. It kind of becomes an issue when someone can actually upskill and essentially pay to win at a lot quicker rate than someone who's played for a long time and has gone completely free to play. The argument being that the game is free, but as a developers, they should be able to reward you for putting money into their game by helping you get an advantage in battle, or whatever the concept of the gameplay loop is. So we could get into power scaling, all these different pieces, but the bit is with gacha games that, especially how most of them are focused on some form of combat or gameplay loop, whether that be a tower defense, open world, or just a straight action RPG, is that as the game gets older, how do you incentivize people to pull for new characters? Well, you introduce some form of challenging endgame content. Once a player has completed all the story bits and has done everything the world has to offer, introduce a bunch of different rotating kind of endgame aspects where a player can go in and basically test themselves against challenging bosses or challenging stages. Now, over time, you're going to have to adapt these different stages to make sure, one, that you don't keep them stale and you keep the gameplay loop, I guess you could say, people coming back into the mix, but two, that if you introduce characters that are a slightly more overpowered, meaning that you'll be able to clear the content quicker or have an easier time of doing it, On top of the fact that the character has different physical qualities and people like how the combat works, people are incentivized to pull for the characters more. And over time, they become the new status quo, and people are incentivized to continue pulling for the next new characters. So you can see, in the live service sense, these games are never ending up until, money stops coming in. So, Gooner bait, microtransactions, and the game goes on forever. So, kind of going at it from this original sin angle, the original sin isn't a specific thing, but it is just the thing. And from this, the humans of our time were predisposed to more sin. In this case, Gooner bait and microtransactions. And so, I'm trying to get at here is a lot of gacha games work only in the sense that people continue paying for them and putting more into the game. Therefore, developers will continue to release updates and more content to continue this essentially endless cycle. Now, the problem is that over the years, gacha games have evolved, and Genshin Impact most notably creating a completely different type of gacha experience in that the gameplay loop was very much centered on the exact same kind of things of, challenging bosses, different stages, but now there's an open world element to it. And with that open world, it was easier to create stories because now you can justify the concept of world building, especially when you can see this world fleshed out. Characters can play in this world, meaning that people can see their characters more. Outfits are incentivized, things like that. And while Genshin did great with that, gacha games have continued to develop in the sense of not just being gameplay focused, but how can we make stories better? How can we incentivize people to come to these worlds and spend more time with these characters, and hence want to spend more time in our worlds and spend more money? It's essentially just a SaaS company, right? Software as a service, where we are continuing to provide updates for our users, and the question is, how can we make sure that users continue spending more money by making the product better and continuing to build out a better system that can keep players and users more engaged to want to continue to pay more? And so, in a way, despite the improvements in the genre and how much it's innovated, at the end of the day, it is still a live service gacha game, meaning that no matter how good the story is or how good the side events are, really you're only doing them to play with these characters, and by virtue of engaging with the story content and the side content, you're doing it to get more currency and henceforth draw on the next character and rinse and repeat. And so in a way, it's very simple. Compared to the noble, hey, let's just make a really good single-player game. Let's take out all the gacha aspects and just keep the story in check. Well, the problem is, companies have kind of realized that if you can sustain a video game with updates over time, it is going to be a much more profitable enterprise than simply releasing a game and saying, okay, this is a one-time revenue stream, maybe a DLC, that's it, move on. And so the problem, however, has become this kind of area of we're trying to make better stories, but at the same time, we are also a gacha game, and gacha games aren't really known for their stories, TBH. And I'll be honest, whenever someone tells me that a gacha game story is good, I myself, as I wouldn't say a super gacha player, but as someone who's spent time and money on them, always go at it with this doubt in my head of, okay, cool, but like, I'm comparing the story to other gacha games. I'm not comparing it to, Final Fantasy VII, or I'm not comparing it to other mediums, other shows. It's kind of similar to how when talking to a regular, normal person, and you both talk about TV shows and movies, you have to compare the mediums within their own kind of branch, but the way that that medium is approached tends to have a bigger impact on how you compare them both. For example, can you argue that Spirited Away is a much better movie than, let's say, Lost in Translation? Yes, you could. However, one's animated, the other one isn't. By virtue of being animated, the question then becomes, can it even be in the same category? It's very similar to how foreign films are, rated in their own independent category simply because subtitles and audio and context are different from movies that are developed in their own respective regions. And so I think that one, there is this original sin laid in place with the Gacha game, which means it has to stay in its own lane. But two, it also operates by virtue of the controversies in the live service space. Live service games are often kind of criticized because they are purposely releasing an unfinished game and then hoping to pull more money out of you by releasing updates over a series of months, years. Two, they're forever dependent on microtransactions, meaning that if for some reason everybody stops playing the game and there's no money coming in, then the game will probably shut down, which means it's temporary. But again, all things are temporary in life. Last but not least, it all goes away if at some point or another someone decides to go to the next live service game. Every single live service game and or gacha game has a lifetime, and a new one will come along to replace it that does everything better or just introduces a fresh brand new twist. It's just the nature of the market. So how do you take gacha games, their stories, and their gameplay and make it something a little more respected? Well, the first solution is, the only way to really kind of create a paradigm shift in that area is you need about a decade's worth of good/great games in the live service category that can compete with other single player games that, well, and here's the bit, because then they start getting compared to simply just purely multiplayer games that are also live service, but that's okay because they know their place. So you have to make good stories, good content, good gameplay loops that are kept innovative and fresh to keep people attached to the game. And the last piece really is just, well, maybe just stop making gacha games altogether and try and make something that is purely story focused. And no, honestly, maybe just get rid of them all. Anyways, these are really just my thoughts on gacha games, and I think they're really fun, and I think it's fair to put them in a completely different category than other kind of games. But I do want to make note of the fact that there is innovation happening in the space year by year, and maybe one day we'll see something different in the space. I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, thanks for listening.